don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get used to this whole thing of talking into cameras and screen time. Uh, I don't know. Anyway, hello to you beautiful people over at the Super Relaxed Fantasy Book Club. My name is Micah Yongo. I'm an epic fantasy author. I've written 2 novels so far. I've been fortunate enough to have published Lost Gods and Pale Kings, and I'll come on to those in just a few moments. And thank you for having me, first of all. Well, digitally speaking anyway, it's such a weird world that we're living in at the moment, isn't it? I remember the first time having the opportunity to come down and visit with you guys. I had such an incredibly great time, and it was one of my first times reading from Lost Gods, my debut novel, in public. And I remember being a little bit nervous at the time, and you guys were so incredibly encouraging and welcoming and accommodating and supportive. It's something that I massively appreciate, both at the time and that I still hold dear today, actually. So because of that, I thought I would take a few moments to share a little bit about the story behind the stories, actually, if that's okay. A little bit about why I write and why and how I actually started writing in the first place. Because I was never massively into books as a kid. I was never massively into reading fiction for recreational purposes when I was a child at all. It was something I arrived at relatively late, I guess, comparatively speaking. I started reading fiction in my late teens, early 20s, and I started writing, some years after that. And so I guess the best way to describe it is I came in via a quite unconventional route, let's say. Basically what had happened is, in my late teens, I suffered a really severe episode of depression. Really big mental health struggles around that time in my life, and it prevented me from being able to complete my studies at the time I was at university. It curtailed, obviously, my emotional, my mental well-being and welfare, as well as my academic life as well. And I found myself some years after that being locked into jobs that I found wholly unsatisfying. And I guess I could imagine a work-life career trajectory that was going to be wholly unsatisfying as a result of that as well. And so I found myself in this email exchange while I was working in this job in an office, which, oh my gosh, God bless any of you who are able to work in offices. It's just not for me at all. I just can't do it at all. I was working for this debt management service, inputting data, which, if I didn't already have depression, that job alone would have been able to accomplish that in me. It was not fun at all. And whilst being there, I got into this email exchange with a friend. It may have been on my lunch break, but I can't guarantee that it was. Might have been Skyping, sorry. And I started talking with them about, I don't know, just I guess my lot in life. I was kind of having a little bit of a pity party, if I'm being totally honest about it. Just lamenting and complaining about all of the things that I felt like had been denied as a consequence of this condition that I'd been suffering with and enduring for a number of years at that point. And so during the course of this exchange, my friend asked me a question which was very outside of the box and very unexpected to me. And they asked me to they said, just, can you describe depression to me? But don't try to describe the thoughts that are involved or the feelings or the emotions or the sensations. I don't think I can wrap my head around that. But could you, if it was a thing, an entity that existed outside of you, how would you describe it? And I found that question so arresting and so compelling, actually, at the time, that I thought I'd give it a go. And so I wrote back, I don't know, this paragraph and a half, maybe 2 paragraphs of descriptive writing of this creature that represented depression to me. And my friend's response was not to continue the conversation that we'd been having around my mental health struggles and everything involved with that, but my friend's response was actually to comment on my writing. And basically, they basically said, "Wow, this is amazing, Micah. You're a very gifted writer." And I'd never really heard anybody say that to me before. In all honesty, I'd never thought about that before. And so I don't know what it was. Something about that affirmation, that small bit of encouragement at that moment in time, it triggered something in me. It triggered something in me. Yes, in terms of being encouraged to write, yes, but more so. It more so triggered me to be able to acknowledge and recognize the sense of catharsis that I'd felt about putting on the page this thing that had been occupying me and dominating me for so long inwardly. There's something very special to me at that time about having the opportunity to see fixed and distilled on the page outside of me this very negative sensation and experience that I'd been enduring on the inside of me. And so something about doing that I became captivated by and compelled by, and I decided that this felt real to me, you know, in my own kind of little imaginary fantasy way. This creature on the page felt real to me, and actually how wonderful would it be and feel to me to actually see this creature that had been tormenting me for so long destroyed, even if it's only on the page, just to see it destroyed. And so I decided I wanted to see that happen on the page. And so I was going to need somebody to do that on the page, which meant I was going to need a character. But in order for that character to make sense and for the whole event that is happening there on the page to make sense, and for it to be coherent and compelling to me, that character is probably going to need a backstory. I guess the creature might need a backstory. Or we're going to need some kind of context in which this whole event is taking place, some kind of broader world, I guess. And I guess just over time, through a series of questions that I was asking myself about what I was writing, I found this thing evolving from a small paragraph that I'd written to a friend into this burgeoning manuscript, basically. I found I'd written maybe 30,000 words over a course of months, and basically over the course of the next however many years, that initial email evolved into becoming Lost Gods, which is my first novel. And so since then, my motivation, my impetus, my intention behind what I write has always been to try to provide a space where we can reframe the whole struggle against mental health, for want of a better way of putting it, because I think that probably more than any other genre that we have access or available to us, fantasy really does afford us this wonderful opportunity to reframe that struggle and to have it set in a way in which people have the opportunity to see the prospect of enduring it and overcoming it as something that can be seen as heroic, because it really is, I feel, and something that can be seen as aspirational, or something that people ought to feel motivated towards doing and achieving, and something that they can feel proud of. And so I wanted to create stories which allow for mental health struggles, allow for depression to be framed in a fantastical way, in such a way that that the hero is overcoming that challenge, basically. And that is why I write now. It's what Lost Gods and Pale Kings is ultimately about. It's in the subtext, it's not up front, you know. It's basically, those stories are about adolescent assassins, and there's plenty of blood, plenty of gore, plenty of conflicts, plenty of warfare, intrigue, political intrigue, betrayal, really, really cool things that I would imagine that you guys will find really entertaining to read. But the subtext is that it's about overcoming inner demons, and it's specifically about overcoming depression. I wonder if you'll read that in the subtext if you get to read the books. So yeah, that being said, I think I'd like to do a reading for you guys now. I'll read from Pale Kings first. I'm going to do 2 very brief readings, one from Pale Kings and then one from Lost Gods. And yeah, I hope that's the background to it, and I hope that you enjoy the reading of it. So I'll go ahead and read. Nathan nodded and looked down at the thin piece of wood ensnared in the vellum, half the length of his thumb and slick with the dried resin encasement. He looked at Ariana once more and then puffed out his cheeks. Then, when he had sat there long enough, he reached out toward it and touched the splintered tip, tentatively at first, his fingers roaming the brittle coarse timber of the shard until he could feel a warmth beginning to build along it, the shard yielding to his touch. And then it was happening. He doubled over on his seat as he felt the strange gravity open inside of him, like being swallowed from within, until finally he let go, falling from himself into it, the world sliding away like shed skin as he dipped inwards to the void. He sees it all, the generations passing over him like a rough breeze, kings and sharifs, mountains, rivers and skies, the terrains of the 5 lands and the world itself, all blinking through him as quick as light, until he wakes up standing on a rampart overlooking a smouldering plain of bodies and armour. He is taller than himself. The spear is no longer a wooden shard, but whole in his hand, upright in his grasp like a staff. The small yellow standard of Sumeria flaps from the bolster like a flag, and beyond it he sees Karel, the first Sharif, founder of the sovereignty, a man dead for more than 200 years, but now standing before him. The waning sun glitters in his eyes as he surveys the carnage below. He is speaking, but Nathan cannot hear. the words slippery, dulled by the shift as though caught in the wind. The Sharif turns to face him and gestures towards the battlefield, sweeping his arm to the gathering twilight where the standards of 1,000 priesthoods lie scattered over the hills. Nathan can see the place where the crown city will be built, and the twin rivers running west toward the lowering sun. He sees the jarring absences, the lack of those broad whitewashed walls and terraces and tall barbicans in the places that he knows they now are. Instead, the land stretches out toward the horizon, naked and empty, shorn of the conquest that will await Karel and his offspring in generations to come. Nathan turns back as a soldier approaches the Sharif with his head bowed, carrying several leather-coated scrolls. The soldier is old and small, a cloud of white hair ringing the backs and sides of his tanned scalp like a horseshoe, as Nathan realizes that he knows this man, recognizes him. But how can that be? How can he be here? The pages of vellum are tightly rolled in the old man's arms. Karel inspects the names written on their covers and nods, and then turns to Nathan, speaking again. Nathan hears him this time. Here, he says, offering the scrolls. Take back what belongs to you. We will not destroy these with the others. They shall be preserved, and you will teach me their use. Nathan's arms reach out, thicker and stronger than his own, to receive the scrolls, cradling the rolls of vellum in broad palms. He looks down on the scroll's ornate coverings, and then reads the name that is his, but isn't. Qualeth, he says. But the words dissolve away as he speaks them, the stitched lettering coming loose and smearing like runny ink along with all else, the sky, the battlefield, the colours of the Sharif's armour and garments, all blurring into each other as the twilight and the Sharif all dim and then slip away, spilling from him like vomit as the stony echo of the room's walls and the inscription-scarred table and the gentle ashy scent of the lamp in the corner and everything else abruptly resumes around him. Nathan fell from his seat, panting, braced on his hands and knees. He could feel the strain and age of the relic. The shard was too old, its memories yielding to decay. He tried to sit up, but he couldn't. There was a new weight to everything. The air felt hot and thin, as though parched by the spicy singe of a cook fire. Did you see? Teju said. Nathan gulped a long, dry breath as he gathered himself and coughed, wiping flecks of bloody spittle from his palm where he'd covered his mouth. Yes, he said. I saw. Okay, that's from Pale Kings. And I'll do you one more brief reading. I guess we still got time. From out of Lost Gods. And it kind of comes towards the end of the novel, where Nathan is getting ready to return to a location that has resembled to him a home of sorts. So, yeah, I won't say any more than that. I'll just go ahead and read. Hope you enjoy. Nathan remembered the feather shadows of the trees as they dappled his face, caging the sun beyond gnarled boughs and greenery as his uncle bore him on the long journey north to Elysia. He remembered how strange it felt, the journey, his mind so numb and empty, a still and quiet weightlessness to it all, somehow, as if captured snug in the buoyancy of a breezeless lake, being carried along without thought as the wheels of the cart shuddered over the root-knotted soil, and then later, as they passed clear of the forests and into the plains, the rubbly bumps of an open, featureless terrain stretching mile after dusty mile beneath the sharp white glare of a naked sun. But what he remembered most were the words of his uncle, his voice hoarse and thin, a taut whisper meandering over his shoulder as he sat at the reins and floating back to Nathan in the cart behind like drifting smoke. All the way there, day after day, murmuring quietly and tensely like there would be nothing more important he would ever say. He told Nathan of Elysia and the Shedayim, and of how Nathan was born to be one of them and how Elysia was his real home. He said the Brotherhood had dwelt there for centuries, abiding secretly in the mountains, separated beyond reach of the world by its great height and its thick, wooded roost of pine, oak, and rock, and the welcome fact of its being so unfeasible and pointless to scale. That's why they chose it, Sol had said. The peak's so tall and difficult, unreachable to all but a few, as is the way of the Shaddai. He said it was there that Nathan would come to truly know himself, and without going there be estranged from ever knowing himself, and instead be lost. He said there in Elysia he would surrender his life and will to a way that was ancient, and that men often resisted surrendering themselves in this way because they lust for freedom, but that this lust is a deceit. He said there is no such thing as a free man, and that each has his own master of one kind or another, and that a man who finds a good master comes to know rest, and he who doesn't knows little. But a man with no master at all is as chaff driven by the wind, and finds no rest, though he thinks himself free. But no one is free. Nathan knew that now. He sat in a trench downwind from the settlement, watching the villagers of Elysia ready for sleep in the distance through the trees. Their quiet and tiny shadowed shapes wandered around, tidying and putting out evening fires. Just like usual, routine waits went on. Ariana sat beside him with her back to the village, leaning against the dirt wall of the trench, eyes to the sky, staring at the silver-black night, the moon 1/3 full, and the stars as multitudinous as dust. The whole thing like a deep, wide sea of glittering mica above them. No clouds. I used to think they were eyes, you know, Ariana said quietly, as Nathan watched another extinguished flame smoulder in the distance. Millions of eyes, far away, all watching. Nathan glanced first at her and then up into the tinsel blackness. The eyes of who? I don't know, Ariana said. The night? The gods, maybe? There are no gods, Nathan answered. You still believe that? Ariana said it casually, as though the idea was quaint or mildly amusing. Nathan thought about it, returned his gaze to the village. He thought about the watcher. He shrugged. I never believed it, Ariana said, even before I saw the watcher. Why not? Nathan answered. There's too much of everything, Ariana replied. The sky, thunder, the way the rain is sometimes when the wind is up, and the sun, these stars, all of it is too much. Whenever Master Johann would tell of the old faiths and say why there were no more, I'd never see why. No one ever says where all this came from. No one explains. Okay, that is Lost Gods. I hope you enjoyed the reading, and I hope equally that you enjoyed a little bit about the story behind the story as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys, so stay safe. Hope you're enduring the pandemic not too bad, and I hope you've taken the most of the opportunity to read as many books as possible. Okay, see you again.